He held the deed to their house in one hand and the power to destroy their lives in the other. It was a classic case of a ruthless millionaire versus a struggling family, a battle that was over before it even began. But what happens when the bad guy walks through the door and realizes that money can buy a house, but it can't buy a home? You think you know how this eviction story ends, but I promise you, you don't. We live in a world where profits are often valued more than people, where a life story is reduced to a credit score and a signature on a dotted line. It's easy to lose faith in humanity when you see good people losing everything to a cold system. We've all felt that fear, the fear of not being enough, the fear of losing our sanctuary, the fear that no one cares. Meet Vincent Reed, a shark in the real estate investor ocean, and Susan Willis, a mother fighting a losing battle to keep a roof over her children's heads. This isn't just a story about a foreclosure, it's a shocking twist of fate that challenges everything we believe about power and poverty. In the next few minutes, you're going to witness a miracle that will restore your faith in the human spirit. But brace yourself, because before the light breaks through, we have to walk through the darkness. You're going to see cruelty that will make your blood boil and a level of generosity that will bring tears to your eyes. It's a roller coaster of emotion, from heartbreaking despair to unbelievable redemption, and it all hinges on a single, split-second decision. We are building a community of people who believe in giving back. If you're ready for a touching story that proves kindness is real, hit that subscribe button. Like this video to take a stand for families like Susan's, and comment "I believe" if you think one person can change a life. Let's dive in. Vincent Reed sat in his high-rise office, the city lights below looking like scattered diamonds, much like the millionaire lifestyle had carved out of stone. To him, the dossier on his desk wasn't a home, it was a foreclosure opportunity, a cold equation of risk versus reward that had solved 1,000 times before. He didn't need to see the peeling paint or the overgrown yard to know the value of the land, treating the property as just another asset in his portfolio. As a seasoned real estate investor, had learned to divorce emotion from business, viewing the transaction with the clinical detachment of a surgeon. He circled the price with a gold pen, a smirk playing on his lips, thinking about the profit margin rather than the humanity attached to the address. It was a steal, a financial slam dunk that would add another zero to his bank account, and honestly, he couldn't care less about the history within those walls. In this cutthroat industry, there wasn't room for a sob story or hesitation. You either ate or you were eaten, and Vincent had a voracious appetite. Had built his empire on the ruins of others' mistakes, turning their heartbreaking failures into his stepping stones without losing a wink of sleep. The concept of a struggling family losing their roof was an abstract idea to him, something that happened in movies, not something that concerned a man of his stature. He tapped his fingers on the mahogany desk, the rhythm mirroring the ticking clock of the auction deadline, knowing he had the upper hand. People often called him lucky, but he knew it wasn't luck, it was the ruthless application of capital in a rich man poor woman world where cash was king. He signed the electronic transfer, sealing the fate of a house he'd never stepped foot in, feeling the rush of another victory. The ink was barely dry on the digital deed, but Vincent was already calculating the renovation costs and the flip price, his mind a whirlwind of numbers. He imagined the eviction notice as merely a piece of administrative paperwork, a necessary evil to clear the path for progress and gentrification. There was no room for gratitude or sentimentality in his playbook. Bricks and mortar didn't have feelings, and neither did he when he was on the clock. He viewed this purchase as a sterile exchange of assets, completely oblivious to the life story that was currently unfolding inside that dilapidated structure. To him, it was just a dot on a map, a coordinate to be conquered and polished until it shined enough to sell to the highest bidder. He leaned back in his leather chair, swirling his scotch, confident that this was just another day at the office, another notch on his belt. Friends and rivals alike marveled at his ability to snap up properties sight unseen, a gamble that usually paid off in spades for the savvy real estate investor. He prided himself on seeing potential where others saw ruin, but his vision was strictly limited to drywall and curb appeal, not the tears that might have soaked the floorboards. It was almost unbelievable how detached he could be, treating the displacement of human beings as a logistical hurdle rather than a moral dilemma. He checked his schedule, noting that he'd need to pay a visit to the site personally to assess the damage and expedite the process. In his mind, he was already spending the check he hadn't earned yet, convinced that the universe or just the market was bending to his will. He was the shark in the water, and this house was just unsuspecting prey waiting to be consumed. Vincent grabbed his coat, the fabric expensive and tailored, a sharp contrast to the poverty he was about to drive into to claim his prize. He expected the usual routine, perhaps some trash left behind, maybe some minor vandalism, but ultimately an empty shell ready for his team. He didn't believe in miracles or divine intervention. He believed in contracts, keys, and the absolute power of ownership rights. The thought of giving back or leniency never crossed his mind as he headed to the elevator. Strict adherence to the timeline was his only religion. He was prepared to be the bad guy if it meant protecting his investment, steeling himself for a potentially awkward but brief interaction. This was business, strictly business, and he wore his indifference like a suit of armor. As he descended to the garage to retrieve his luxury car, a strange feeling of anticipation settled in his gut, though he dismissed it as hunger. He punched the address into the GPS, the digital voice guiding him toward a destiny he couldn't possibly foresee, a life-changing collision course set in motion. He thought he was driving toward a quick inspection and a firm handshake with a sheriff, totally unprepared for the shocking twist reality had in store. The engine roared to life, a beast of engineering carrying a man who thought he knew everything about value, yet knew nothing about worth. He pulled out into traffic, the city blurring past him, unaware that the redemption often starts with a wrong turn into a neighborhood you'd never visit otherwise. He was on his way to serve a notice, but fate was preparing to serve him a lesson. He adjusted his rearview mirror, catching a glimpse of his own determined eyes, eyes that had seen everything but truly understood very little about the human condition. The drive was just a commute to him, a necessary bridge between the deal and the deposit, devoid of any emotional weight.
He had no idea that the signature he'd just scribbled was about to rewrite his own soul's contract, challenging his identity as a heartless tycoon. The struggling family at the other end of his journey wasn't just a tenant statistic, they were the catalyst for a transformation he didn't know he needed. As the skyline faded in the distance, Vincent Reed drove deeper into the unknown, a wealthy man about to find out just how poor he really was. The GPS led Vincent away from the manicured lawns of the suburbs into a neighborhood that had clearly seen better days, the streets lined with stories of hardship. He parked his sleek, silver sedan in front of foreclosure, the vehicle looking like a spaceship that had landed on an alien, impoverished planet. The house itself was weary, its shoulders slumped under the weight of years of neglect, mirroring the heartbreaking reality of its occupants. Vincent stepped out, checking his watch, his demeanor screaming impatience and authority as he surveyed the property with a critical eye. He expected to find a vacant building, perhaps stripped of its copper wiring, or at worst, hostile squatters ready for a fight. He tightened his grip on the leather folder containing the eviction notice, his weapon of choice in this war of assets. He walked up the cracked pathway, dodging weeds that claimed dominion over the concrete, his expensive shoes out of place on the uneven ground. The silence of the street was heavy, a stark contrast to the bustling city head left behind, and it made him strangely uncomfortable. He was ready for a confrontation, mentally rehearsing the legal jargon he would use to assert his rights as the new real estate investor owner. To him, the people inside, if there were any, were just obstacles, biological barriers to his renovation schedule that needed to be removed. He didn't consider their life story or where they would go. That wasn't his department. And frankly, he didn't pay himself to care. He reached the porch, the wood groaning under his weight as if warning him to turn back. Vincent raised his hand to knock, his knuckles rapping sharply against the peeling pane of the front door, a sound that echoed like a gavel. He stood back, adjusting his tie, projecting the image of the untouchable millionaire who had no time for excuses or delays. He anticipated silence, or perhaps the scurrying sound of people fleeing out the back, a common occurrence in his line of work. He was prepared to call the locksmith immediately, to secure his investment and wipe the slate clean of whatever struggling family had failed here. The air smelled of rain and old wood, a scent of decay that Vincent associated with opportunity and profit. He tapped his foot, his patience already wearing thin, eager to get back to his world of glass and steel. But the door didn't open immediately. And for a moment, Vincent wondered if the house was truly abandoned, a hollow shell of former life. He peered through the dirty glass of the side window, trying to catch a glimpse of the interior, looking for signs of habitation. He saw movement, a shadow shifting the dim light, and his jaw tightened. He hated it when they dragged this out. It confirmed his suspicion that this wouldn't be a clean handover, fueling his annoyance and hardening his heart against any potential tears. He prepared his firm but fair speech, the one that usually ended with him threatening to call the authorities if they didn't vacate. This was the ugly side of the business, the rich man, poor woman dynamic that he usually tried to delegate to underlings. Suddenly, the door creaked open, not with a bang, but with a hesitant, terrifying slowness that caught Vincent off guard. He braced himself for a shout, a curse, or a slammed door, the typical reactions of those losing their sanctuary. Instead, he was met with a quiet, tense atmosphere that spilled out onto the porch, thick with anxiety and fear. He didn't see a monster or a criminal. He just felt a wave of sadness that he quickly tried to brush aside. He reminded himself of the foreclosure paperwork in his hand, the legal shield that protected him from having to feel anything. He was here to do a job, to finalize a transaction, and he wouldn't let sentimentality cloud his judgment. He cleared his throat, ready to bark his demands, ready to be the villain in their life story, because that's what the spreadsheet dictated. He expected resistance, the kind born of desperation, the kind that usually required the police to resolve. Vincent Reed didn't do kindness during business hours, he did efficiency, and this situation was becoming inefficient. He stared at the gap in the door, waiting for the occupant to reveal themselves, fully expecting a confrontation. He had no idea that the person on the other side wasn't an enemy, but a mirror that would soon reflect his own emptiness. As the door fully opened, Vincent's carefully constructed demeanor faltered for a microsecond, his eyes adjusting to the gloom inside. He was ready for a fight, but you can't fight a ghost, and the energy coming from the house felt fragile, not aggressive. He gripped the eviction notice tighter, as if it were a shield, sensing that this wasn't going to be the standard cash for key scenario. The shocking twist wasn't that the house was occupied, it was that the presence inside felt overwhelmingly human. He took a breath, stepped into the frame, and prepared to deliver the bad news, unaware that he was the one about to receive a life-changing revelation. Vincent stepped across the threshold, the floorboards creaking a mournful tune, and his eyes landed on a scene that froze the legal jargon in his throat. It wasn't a drug den or a squatter's nest, it was a home being dismantled, piece by piece, by a struggling family. Susan Willis stood in the center of the living room, surrounded by cardboard boxes that seemed to contain her entire universe. She looked up, her eyes wide with a terror that she was desperately trying to hide from the two small children clinging to her legs. It was a heartbreaking tableau of vulnerability, a stark contrast to the hostile reception Vincent had geared himself up for. The air was thick with the scent of cheap cleaning supplies and palpable anxiety. Susan didn't scream or curse, she simply froze, like a deer caught in the headlights of Vincent's millionaire ambition. Her hands were trembling as she folded a worn-out blanket, an action so mundane yet so heavy with finality that it struck a chord. The children, a boy and a girl no older than 7, looked at Vincent with wide, confused eyes, sensing the threat he represented. They were packing their meager belongings, toys, clothes, a framed picture of a smiling man who was no longer there with a quiet dignity that was almost painful to watch. This wasn't just a house to them, it was their sanctuary, and Vincent was a storm coming to blow it down. The foreclosure wasn't a business deal here, it was an apocalypse. Vincent felt a flicker of annoyance at himself for pausing. He was a real estate investor, not a social worker. He tried to summon the cold indifference that had served him so well in the past, scanning the room for damage rather than looking at the people. But the room was tidy, surprisingly so, with patches on the walls where photos had once hung, leaving clean squares like ghosts of happier times. It was undeniably a rich man, poor woman standoff, but Susan didn't look like she wanted a handout. She looked like she wanted a few more minutes of dignity. She whispered something to the children, smoothing their hair, a gesture of protection that made Vincent feel like an intruder in a sacred space. "I'm here for the keys," Vincent said, his voice sounding too loud in the quiet room, stripping away the humanity of the moment. Susan nodded slowly, not meeting his eyes, continuing to pack a small box with cracked ceramic figurines. "We know," she replied softly, her voice trembling but controlled. "We're almost done. Just a few more things." Her resilience was unbelievable, a quiet strength that seemed to defy the gravity of the situation. She wasn't fighting the eviction, she was accepting it with a grace that Vincent found disturbing. He was used to anger, to shouting matches. He wasn't used to the silent, crushing defeat. The children watched him, their small hands clutching stuffed animals that had seen better days. Their innocence a stark contrast to Vincent's cynical worldview. He noticed a girl was wearing shoes that were slightly too big, and the boy's shirt was faded, signs of the poverty they lived in daily. Yet, they weren't crying, they were helping, mimicking their mother's stoicism in the face of disaster. It was a touching story unfolding in real time, but Vincent fought to keep his distance, reminding himself of the profit margin. He tapped his watch again, a nervous tick, tried to accelerate the process, trying to push them out so he could stop feeling the strange discomfort. Susan finally looked at him, her eyes red-rimmed but dry, holding a gaze that was devoid of hate but full of sorrow. "We didn't want it to end like this," she said, almost as an apology to the man who was kicking them out. It was a moment of raw gratitude for the time they did have, rather than bitterness for the time they lost. Vincent shifted his weight, the floor groaning, feeling like the villain in a movie he hadn't signed up for. He realized, with a jolt, that these people weren't squatters, they were a family who had simply run out of luck. The life story written on Susan's face was one of exhaustion, of fighting a battle she knew she couldn't win. He looked around the room one last time, seeing not just a property, but the remnant of a life he was actively erasing. The boxes were few, highlighting just how little they had to take with them into the unknown. It was a scene of redemption denied, of a system that crushed the weak without a second thought, and for the first time, Vincent felt the weight of the deed in his pocket. He was a hammer, and they were the nail, but seeing them packed made him wonder if he was breaking the wrong thing. He steeled himself, pushing down the empathy, determined to see this through to the bitter, profitable end. Vincent checked his watch for the third time, making a show of his impatience, a calculated move to assert dominance. "Look, I have a schedule to keep," he stated flatly, his tone slicing through the fragile atmosphere of the room. He deliberately avoided making eye contact with the children, focusing his gaze on a water stain on the ceiling, treating Susan like an incompetent employee rather than a mother losing her home. His millionaire mindset was in full swing. Time was money, and she was wasting both. He didn't offer to help with a heavy box. He didn't ask where they were going. He just stood there, a monolith of foreclosure enforcement. The bank said the property would be vacated by noon. Vincent lied, or perhaps exaggerated, just to twist a knife of urgency. He tapped his foot on the hardwood, the sound echoing like a ticking bomb, pressuring Susan to move faster. It was a cruel tactic, one had used in boardrooms to rattle opponents. But here, against a struggling family, it felt excessive, almost bullying. Yet, he justified it as necessary softness was a weakness that a real estate investor couldn't afford. He wanted the keys, he wanted them out, and he wanted to lock the door on this uncomfortable chapter. He was the embodiment of the system, faceless, efficient, and utterly devoid of humanity. Susan flinched at his tone, but didn't snap back. She simply sped up her movements, her hands shaking more noticeably now. Vincent watched her struggle with a taped-up box, his arms crossed over his chest, a barrier between him and her heartbreaking reality. He could have lifted it with one hand, but that would imply a connection, a shared burden, and he refused to cross that line. "Leave the trash," he said callously, gesturing to a pile of old magazines. "My crew will handle the dumpster." It was a demeaning comment, labeling their possessions as garbage, a slap in the face to their dignity. He saw the tears welling up in her eyes, but he looked away, staring out the window at his car. He pulled out his phone, scrolling through emails, signaling that his digital life was more important than their physical displacement. "I need the keys in my hand in 5 minutes," he demanded, not asking, but ordering. It was a height of arrogance, the rich man, poor woman dynamic displayed in its ugliest form. He was testing her, pushing her, perhaps waiting for the explosion that would justify his callousness. If she screamed, he could be the victim, he could call the police and feel righteous. But her silence, her subservience, was stripping him of that defense, leaving him with just his own cold behavior. The children huddled closer to Susan, looking at Vincent as if he were a monster from a fairy tale. And in that moment, he was. He ignored their fear, convincing himself that this was a life lesson for them. The world is tough. Get used to it. He was immune to the touching story happening inches from him, encased in a bubble of entitlement. Is the basement cleared? He barked, checking items off a mental list, treating the inspection like a military drill. He was thorough, ruthless, and completely blind to the life story he was trampling on. "Yes, sir," Susan whispered, the sir hanging in the air like a badge of shame. Vincent didn't correct her. He liked the title, the acknowledgement of his power. He felt big in that small room, a giant among ruins, but it was a hollow victory. He was winning the eviction, but he was losing something else, something he couldn't quite name yet. He walked to the door, holding it open, a silent command for them to leave. The cold draft from outside blew in, chilling the room, matching the ice in Vincent's veins. He checked his watch again. For minutes, he announced, a countdown to their homelessness. He was playing the role of the villain to perfection, convinced that this was just business. He didn't see the miracle of resilience in front of him. He only saw a transaction that was taking too long. He was a man who knew the price of everything and the value of nothing, standing in a doorway, ushering a family into the cold. The tension in the room was thick enough to choke on, fueled by Vincent's aggressive impatience. He expected Susan to finally snap, to curse him out, or to throw one of the boxes at his expensive suit. It was a reaction he was braced for, the reaction that would validate his eviction of a troublesome tenant. But then Susan stopped packing. She wiped her hands on her apron, took a deep breath, and turned to face him, not with rage, but with a weary, gentle expression. "You've been waiting a while," she said softly, her voice trembling slightly. "Would you like a glass of water? It's hot outside." Vincent froze, his brain struggling to process the offer. It was a shocking twist that didn't fit into his worldview. Here he was, kicking her out of her home, treating her like dirt, and she was offering him hospitality? It was unbelievable. He blinked, looking at her as if she had spoken in a foreign language. What? He stammered, his confident millionaire mask slipping for the first time. He looked for the sarcasm, the hidden trap, but found none. It was a genuine gesture of kindness from a woman who had every right to hate him. "I know you're just doing your job," Susan continued, pouring water from a pitcher into a clean, albeit chipped glass. "I'm sorry for the delay. It's harder to fit a life into a sedan than I thought." She handed him the glass, her fingers brushing his for a fleeting second. The water was cool, the glass sweating in the humidity, a physical manifestation of her generosity. Vincent took it reflexively, his hand hovering in the air, caught between his role as the ruthless real estate investor and the recipient of this unexpected grace. He looked at the water, then at Susan. She wasn't playing a game, she was maintaining her humanity, even as her world collapsed. "We have nowhere to go yet," she admitted, the confession slipping out with the water. "My sister said she might have room next week. But for now..." She trailed off, a single tear escaping, which she quickly wiped away. She wasn't begging, she was just explaining, apologizing for the inconvenience of her own tragedy. It was a heartbreaking display of dignity that made Vincent feel suddenly very small. He took a sip of the water, the cool liquid soothing his dry throat, tasting like guilt. He wanted to put the glass down, to reject the kindness, to stay angry and efficient. But he couldn't. The simple act of offering water to the executioner was a level of redemption he hadn't earned. It confused him, disarmed him. "You don't have to apologize," he muttered, the words feeling clumsy. He was supposed to be the one demanding the keys, not the one being served refreshments. Susan smiled sadly, a weak, fleeting thing. "My mother always said, 'Be kind, for everyone is fighting a hard battle.'" She looked at her children, who were now sitting quietly on the packed boxes. "I want them to see that we don't lose our manners just because we lost our house." It was a lesson in true wealth that Vincent, with all his millions, had never learned. He stood there, holding the cheap glass, realizing that this woman was richer in spirit than he would ever be. The dynamic had shifted. He was no longer just a powerful landlord. He was a guest in the final moments of home. The rich man, poor woman divide was still there, but the moral high ground had shifted beneath his feet. He looked at the water again, seeing his own reflection in the surface distorted, wavering. He hadn't just walked into a house, he had walked into a masterclass on grace, and he was failing the test miserably. Vincent held the glass of water like it was a foreign object, the coolness seeping into his fingertips, grounding him in a reality he hadn't anticipated. He looked around the room with fresh eyes, the lens of his cynical real estate investor persona cracking. Before, he saw only assets and liabilities, peeling paint and old fixtures. Now, confused by Susan's kindness, he saw the details he had missed. The house wasn't just clean, it was scrubbed raw, the smell of lemon and effort masking the scent of poverty. It was a defiant cleanliness, a statement that they might be broke, but they weren't broken. He noticed the faint pencil marks on the doorframe, a growth chart recording the heights of the children over the years. Age 3, age 5, big boy, tiny hieroglyphics of a life story that he was about to whitewash over. It was heartbreaking. He saw the handmade curtains, faded but neatly hemmed, evidence of a mother who tried to make a castle out of a shack. There was love in the cracks of the plaster, memories in the scuffs on the floor. This wasn't a slum, it was a sanctuary that had simply run out of money. You kept this place well, Vincent admitted, the words feeling strange in his mouth. He was used to trashing tenants, to listing damages so the security deposit had never returned. Susan looked up from a box, surprised by the observation. "It's our home," she said simply, as if that explained everything. "Just because we don't own the paper doesn't mean we don't own the pride." Her words struck him. He realized that for all his millionaire status, he lived in a penthouse that felt like a hotel, sterile and cold. Here, amidst the eviction, there was a warmth he couldn't buy. He watched the children again. The boy was sharing a granola bar with his sister, breaking it precisely in half. It was a reflex of sharing, of survival, of a family unit that functioned as one. It was unbelievable to Vincent, who viewed every relationship as a transaction. He realized that Susan hadn't just cleaned the house for herself, she had cleaned it for him, the new owner, out of respect for property itself. It was a level of integrity that made his own ruthless business practices feel dirty. "Why?" Vincent asked, almost involuntarily. "Why treat me? Why offer me water? I'm kicking you out." He needed to understand the logic, to find the angle. Susan paused, holding a folded sweater. "Because hate is too heavy to carry when you're already carrying everything else," she replied. It was a shocking twist of philosophy that left him speechless. She wasn't angry because she was too busy being strong. Vincent felt a lump in his throat, a sensation he hadn't felt in years. He looked at the foreclosure notice peeking out his foldera piece of paper that seemed so powerful an hour ago, now looking flimsy and cruel. He was the bad guy in this movie. There was no doubt about it. The house was filled with love, and he was the darkness creeping in. He set the glass down on a bare windowsill, the sound echoing the hollowness in his chest. He walked over to the mantel, where a single rectangle of dust remained where a picture had been. He traced the outline with his finger. He was displacing humanity for the sake of a flip. The profit he would make suddenly seemed like blood money. He was confused, rattled, his moral compass spinning wildly in the magnetic field of Susan's goodness. He had come to inspect a building, but he was inspecting his own soul, and he didn't like what he found. The silence stretched, filled only by the rustle of packing paper, until Vincent, driven by a gnawing curiosity he couldn't suppress, asked a question that had been forming in his mind. How did it get this bad? He gestured vaguely to the boxes, his tone less accusatory and more genuinely puzzled. He knew the stats on foreclosure. Usually, it was bad investments or laziness. Susan sighed, a sound that carried the weight of the world. She didn't look for sympathy, she just spoke the truth. It wasn't bad choices. She began, it was bad luck. My husband, he got sick. She pointed to the empty spot on the wall where the photo had been. Cancer doesn't care about your savings account, she said, her voice steady but her eyes glistening with tears. The insurance covered some, but not the treatments that gave him 6 more months. She looked at Vincent, her gaze piercing. We spent Every dime. The retirement fund, the college savings, the house payments. We traded our future for a little more time with him. It was a heartbreaking revelation. She framed it not as a complaint, but as a sacrifice she'd make again in a heartbeat. Vincent felt the air leave his lungs. He dealt in risk management, in hedging bets. The idea of bankrupting oneself for love was a foreign concept, a life-changing gamble he'd never taken. "You spent everything?" he asked, incredulous. "Everything," Susan affirmed. "And I'd do it again." Those 6 months. The kids got to say goodbye. He got to see our son start school. You can't put a price tag on that. But the world had put a price tag on it. And the cost was this house. "So you stopped paying the mortgage," Vincent stated, the real estate investor in him trying to find the logic. "I had to choose between the bank and the chemotherapy," Susan said, a sad smile playing on her lips. "I chose him, and when he passed, there was nothing left to catch us." She shrugged, a gesture of acceptance. "I thought I could get back on my feet faster, but with the grief and the kids, the hole was too deep." It was a story of struggling family heroism, not financial irresponsibility. She wasn't a deadbeat. She was a widow who had fought a war against death and lost her financial armor in the process. Vincent looked at the children, seeing them now not as baggage, but as a legacy of that sacrifice. They were the reason she kept going. The rich man, poor woman narrative collapsed. She wasn't poor because she failed. She was poor because she loved too much. It was a touching story that made Vincent's wealth feel cheap and meaningless. "I didn't know," Vincent murmured, a useless admission. "Of course you didn't," Susan replied gently. "To the bank, we're just a number in red ink. To you, we're just a delay." She wasn't trying to gild him, she was just stating facts. But the guilt hit him like a physical blow. He was the final consequence of her husband's illness, the grim reaper coming for the house now that the husband was gone. It was a shocking twist to his perception. He had assumed negligence, he found nobility. He looked at Susan with a newfound respect that bordered on awe. She had traded her security for love, a trade he realized, with a sinking feeling, he had never been brave enough to make. He was standing in the ruins of a tragedy, holding the eviction notice like a weapon he no longer wanted to use. The miracle here wasn't money, it was her endurance. Vincent needed air. He needed to step out of the emotional pressure cooker that the living room had become. But the skeptic in him, the real estate investor who had been scammed a dozen times, still whispered a doubt. Was this all an act? A play for sympathy to get an extension? He decided to run a test, a cruel little experiment to see if her kindness was real or just a strategy. As he turned to check the perimeter of the house, he accidentally left his latest model smartphone worth more than her car sitting on the porch railing, in plain sight. He walked down the driveway, pretending to inspect the gutters, but his ears were tuned to the porch. He expected her to pocket it, to sell it, to use it as leverage. In his millionaire world, people took what they could get. It would be a justification for him, a reason to go back to being the cold landlord. She's a thief, he wanted to be able to say. She deserves the eviction. He waited by his car, his heart pounding, half hoping she would fail so he could feel better about himself. Minutes ticked by. He unlocked his car, the beep chirping loudly. Suddenly, he heard running footsteps on the pavement. He turned, expecting a confrontation or a plea. Instead, he saw Susan running toward him, breathless, hold his phone out like a sacred relic. "Sir, Mr. Reed," she called out, her face flushed. "You left this on the porch." She reached him, extending the device, not a scratch on it. Vincent stared at the phone, then at her. She wasn't looking for a reward, she was just relieved she caught him. "I saw it sitting there, and I was afraid you'd drive off without it," she explained, catching her breath. "It looks expensive. You probably have important work on it." The integrity displayed was blinding. A woman who had nothing, who was being kicked out by him, had just sprinted to return a device that could have bought her groceries for months. It was unbelievable. He took the phone, his hand shaking slightly. You brought it back," he said, sounding stupid. Of course, Susan frowned, confused by his reaction. "It's yours." Stealing it wouldn't make things right. She wiped her hands on her jeans. I just didn't want you to lose your contacts. She was worried about his contacts while losing her home. The gratitude he felt was mixed with a crushing sense of shame. This was the redemption of his cynicism. She had passed the test he had no right to give. It proved that her character was bulletproof, untouched by her poverty. She was honest to a fault, a rare gem in a world of fakes. Vincent felt like the thief now, stealing her shelter while she protected his property. The shocking twist was his own realization of just how low he had stooped. "Thank you, Susan," he said, using her name for the first time with genuine respect. "That was honest of you." She smiled, a real smile this time. "Honesty is free, Mr. Reed. It's the one thing we can afford." She turned and walked back to the house, her head held high. Vincent watched her go, the phone burning a hole in his hand. He had tried to prove she was unworthy, and instead, he had proved that he was the one who didn't deserve to be there. Just as the walls of Vincent's cynicism were crumbling, the roar of a sports car shattered the moment. A black convertible screeched to a halt behind Vincent's sedan, and out stepped Marcus, Vincent's business partner. Marcus was the embodiment of the real estate investor's stereotype flashy suit, loud voice, and eyes that saw dollar signs in everything. "Vinny," Marcus yelled, slamming the car door. "I tracked the GPS thought ID, come see the new acquisition. Why is there still a car in the driveway?" Vincent's stomach dropped. Marcus was the enforcer, the guy who enjoyed the eviction process. He walked up the driveway with a swagger, ignoring the weeds, focused only on the delay. "We're on a schedule, Vincent. The crew is booked for tomorrow morning. Why are these squatters still here?" He didn't lower his voice. He wanted to be heard. He wanted to intimidate. To him, this wasn't a struggling family. It was an infestation. Susan stepped out onto the porch, drawn by the noise, the children peeking from behind her. Marcus saw them and sneered. "Oh, great. Kids." The classic shield. He turned to Vincent. "Did you call the cops yet? Or are you going soft?" The accusation hung in the air. Vincent felt a surge of protectiveness he couldn't explain. "They're packing, Marcus." "Give them a minute," Vincent said, his voice tight. A minute turns into an hour into a week. Marcus shouted, pulling out his phone. "I'm calling the sheriff. Forcible entry. Trespassing. Let's get this over with." He began dialing, his thumb hovering over the screen. Susan gasped, her face draining of color. The threat of police, of a forcible removal in front of her children, was her worst nightmare. It was a heartbreaking escalation that Vincent hadn't planned. "Marcus." "Put the phone away," Vincent warned, but his partner just laughed. "This is business. Vinny, you buy him, I clear him. That's the deal." Marcus marched toward the house, waving the phone like a weapon. "You have 5 minutes to vacate, or you leave in cuffs." He yelled at Susan. The children started to cry, a shrill sound of pure terror. The rich man, poor woman power dynamic was now a physical threat. Vincent stood frozen for a second, caught between his old life and his new realization. Marcus was doing exactly what Vincent would have done an hour ago. He was looking at a mirror of his past self, and it was ugly. The humanity of the situation was being steamrolled by corporate greed. Susan looked at Vincent, her eyes pleading, silently asking, "Is this who you are?" "I said I'm calling," Marcus announced, hitting the call button. The situation was spiraling out of control. The tears on the children's faces, Susan's trembling hands. Marcus' arrogant sight was a chaotic collision of worlds. Vincent knew he had to act, but the inertia of his career, of his reputation, held him back. The shocking twist was that the real villain had arrived, and he was wearing Vincent's team colors. As Marcus shouted into his phone, demanding a patrol car, Susan's gaze locked onto Vincent. The connection they had built over a glass of water. The return phone, the shared moment of understanding it all shattered. In her eyes, Vincent saw a devastating conclusion forming. She believed he had called Marcus. She believed this was a good cop, bad cop routine, a sick game to humiliate her. The betrayal was written all over her face, more painful than the eviction itself. "You," she whispered, her voice cracking. "I thought you. I trusted you." She pulled her children close, shielding them with her body, backing away into the shadows of the house. It was a heartbreaking sight. She had offered him kindness, and she thought he had repaid her with a squad car. The tears that flowed now weren't just a sadness, they were a deep, cutting disappointment in humanity. Vincent stepped forward, hand raised. "Susan." "No, I didn't," but his voice was drowned out by Marcus barking coordinates to the dispatcher. To Susan, Vincent's silence during Marcus' tirade was complicity. She looked at him with a mix of hurt and anger that pierced his soul. She had shown him her life story, her tragedy, and she believed he had used it against her. She slammed the front door, the sound echoing like a gunshot. From inside, the muffled sounds of sobbing and frantic movement could be heard. They were terrified, trapped like animals. Vincent felt a wave of nausea. He had let this happen. By not stopping Marcus immediately, he had validated the cruelty. The struggling family was now under siege, and he was standing on the side of the besiegers. Marcus hung up, grinning. "That's how it's done. They'll be out in 10. He clapped Vincent on the shoulder. "You're slipping, buddy." Getting chatty with the help? Vincent shrugged a hand off, staring at the closed door. He felt the weight of the unbelievable injustice. He had finally seen the truth, and now he was being painted as a monster again. The gratitude she had shown him for the water, for the time, was gone, replaced by fear. He realized that trust is a fragile thing, easily broken by silence. He wanted to kick the door down and explain, but what could he say? "I'm the boss, but I'm not in charge?" It was a pathetic excuse. He was the millionaire. The buck stopped with him. He heard the sirens in the distance, a wailing sound that signaled the end of the line. Susan was inside, hugging her kids, waiting for the men with guns to drag them out, and she thought it was Vincent's doing. That thought burned him more than any lost deal ever could. He was witnessing the tears of the innocent, and he was the reason they were falling. The squad car pulled up, lights flashing, casting a chaotic red and blue strobing effect over the rundown house. It turned the quiet misery of the foreclosure into a public spectacle. Neighbors started to peek out of their windows, witnessing the shame being heaped upon Susan and her kids. 2 officers stepped out, hands resting on their belts, faces grim. Marcus greeted them like old friends, waving the paperwork. Trespassers, refusing to vacate. "We need them out now." The police nodded, approached the door, and pounded on it. "Police, open up." The authority in their voices brooked no argument. The door opened slowly, revealing Susan, her face swollen from crying, holding a child in each arm. It was a scene of utter despair. The officers weren't cruel, but they were firm. "Ma'am, you have to leave the premises. The owner has the right to the property." They gestured to Vincent and Marcus. Susan nodded, defeated. "We're going. Please, just don't hurt us." She walked out onto the porch, carrying a single bag, the children clutching her legs, terrified of the uniforms. It was the ultimate walk of shame. The eviction was complete. They were homeless, standing on the sidewalk, while the men in suits watched from the driveway. It was a rich man, poor woman tragedy played out in high definition. The officers stood by, ensuring they didn't re-enter. Marcus was beaming, checking his watch. "See? Efficiency." Vincent felt sick. He watched the little boy look back at the house, then at Vincent. The look wasn't anger, it was confusion. "Why are you doing this?" The eyes seemed to ask. Vincent felt like he was suffocating in his expensive suit. The life-changing moment was happening, but it felt like a death. Susan tried to comfort her daughter, who was asking where they would sleep. "In the car, baby. It's an adventure," she lied, her voice breaking. It was a heartbreaking lie. The kind mothers tell to protect their children's hearts while their own are breaking. They began to walk toward an old, rusted sedan parked on the street, their entire life reduced to what they could carry. The police were just doing their job. Marcus was just doing his job. But Vincent realized that just doing your job was the excuse used for every atrocity in history. He looked at the empty house, then at the family. The house was just wood and stone. The family was flesh and blood. The poverty wasn't a crime, but they were being treated like criminals. He saw Susan stumble slightly, exhausted, but she caught herself. She wouldn't fall in front of them. Her humanity shone even in this darkest moment. Vincent stood there, the keys in his pocket, feeling like heavy stones. He was the winner. He had the house. But looking at the crying children, he felt like the biggest loser on earth. Vincent watched the family huddled by their car. The little girl was sobbing into Susan's skirt, a sound that cut through the ambient noise of the street. It triggered a memory Vincent had buried deep on memory of his own childhood, of a landlord standing on a porch, of his own mother crying. He had built his millionaire empire to ensure he never felt that powerlessness again. But in his quest to escape poverty, he had become the very thing he hated: the oppressor. He looked at Marcus, who was laughing with one of the cops. He looked at the foreclosure sign. He looked at his own reflection in the car window. He didn't see a successful real estate investor. He saw a monster, a hollow man who preyed on the weak. The tears of those children were on his hands. He realized that no amount of money could scrub the stain away. The realization hit him like a physical blow. I am the bad guy. He had sworn to be better, to be strong, but it confused strength with cruelty. He had lost his humanity in the pursuit of profit. Susan's kindness, her offering of water, her returning of the phone he had stood in stark contrast to his actions. She was a better person. She was the one with the true wealth. He felt a rage bubbling up, not at them, but at himself, at the system he perpetuated, at Marcus, at the lie that this was just business. It wasn't business, it was people's lives. The shocking twist was internal. His heart, dormant for decades, suddenly woke up screaming. He couldn't let them drive away. He couldn't live with this ghost haunting him. He looked at the deed in his hand, the piece of paper that gave him the legal right to ruin them. It was just paper. It was ink. It wasn't a law of physics. It could be changed. The redemption he needed wasn't in the next deal. It was in this moment. He had to choose: continue being the monster or become the man he wanted to be. He saw Susan opening the car door, preparing to put her children into a homeless night. That image broke him. The heartbreaking reality of their future was too much to bear. He wasn't just observing a tragedy, he was the author of it. And as the author, he had the power to rewrite the ending. Vincent clenched his fists. The fear of losing money vanished, replaced by the fear of losing his soul. He took a step forward, away from Marcus, away from the safety of his cold indifference. He was crossing a line, and there was no going back. It was time for a miracle, and he realized with a jolt that he was the only one who could perform it. "Stop!" Vincent's voice boomed across the yard, louder than he intended, stopping Susan's hand on the car door. Everyone froze. Marcus turned, confused. "What? Vinny, what is it?" Vincent marched down the driveway, ignoring his partner, walking straight toward the police officers and the struggling family. His heart was hammering, but his mind was clear for the first time in years. There had been a mistake, Vincent announced, breathless. He stood between the police and Susan. A clerical error, a huge one. Marcus scoffed, walking over. "What are you talking about? I have the deed right here." The bank approved it. Vincent turned on Marcus, his eyes blazing with fire that silenced the other man. "I said there was an error, Marcus, in the paperwork. The transfer wasn't valid. It was a lie, a bold, unbelievable lie, but it was the only way to stop the machinery." The police officers exchanged glances. "So, they're not trespassing?" One asked. "No," Vincent said firmly. "They are the rightful tenants." We made a mistake in the filing." Susan looked at him, her eyes wide with confusion and a flicker of hope. She knew he was lying, but she didn't understand why. "Vincent, are you crazy?" Marcus hissed, grabbing his arm. "This is a gold mine. What are you doing?" Vincent shook him off. "I'm fixing a mistake. Marcus, go back to the office." It was a shocking twist for everyone. The ruthless shark was suddenly sabotaging his own meal. The real estate investor was throwing away profit. "Officer, you can go," Vincent told the police. "I apologize for wasting your time. No eviction is happening today." The cops shrugged. They didn't care about civil disputes and got back in their car. The lights went off, and the silence returned to the street. The eviction was canceled. The threat was gone. Marcus was red in the face. "You're throwing away 50 grand. For what? For them? He pointed at the family. Yes, Vincent said softly. For them. He looked at Susan, seeing the tears of relief starting to fall. He had stopped the bleeding. He had used his power for protection, not destruction. He felt a lightness he hadn't felt in decades. The miracle had happened. He had stopped the inevitable. But he wasn't done yet. A clerical error was a temporary fix. He needed a permanent solution. He turned to Marcus one last time. Get in your car, Marcus. I'll handle the rest. Marcus stood his ground for a moment, fuming, holding the copy of the eviction notice like it was holy scripture. You're soft, Vincent. You're finished, he spat, throwing the paper at Vincent's chest before storming off to his car. The sports car roared away, leaving only the sound of the wind in the trees. Vincent caught the paper against his chest. He looked at its legal language, the threats, the cold authority. He walked over to Susan, who was still standing by her car, trembling. She didn't know what to say. Was this a trick? Vincent held up the notice. This, he said, his voice shaking with emotion, is garbage. With a deliberate, slow motion, he ripped the paper in half. The sound was crisp, loud, and incredibly satisfying. He didn't stop there. He tore it again and again, shredding the legal thread into confetti. He let the pieces fall from his hands, drifting down to the pavement like snow. It was a symbolic act of generosity, a rejection of the system that prioritized paper over people. Susan watched, her hand covering her mouth, a gasp escaping her lips. It was unbelievable. Mr. Reed, she started but couldn't finish. The children watched the white pieces of paper fall, fascinated. To them, it looked like magic. To Vincent, it felt like redemption. He was destroying the evidence of his own cruelty. He was breaking the contract that bound him to his greed. I can't take the house, Vincent said, his voice raw. Not from you. Not after. Everything. He looked at the struggling family. You invited me in. You gave me water. You returned my phone. You showed me what a home looks like. He kicked the pile of torn paper aside. This notice doesn't exist anymore. It was a life-changing gesture. He wasn't just pausing the eviction. He was destroying it. The heartbreaking tension that had gripped the last hour evaporated, replaced by a stunned silence. Susan took a step forward, looking at the torn paper, then at Vincent's face. She saw no malice there, only regret and a new, fierce determination. Vincent felt exposed, vulnerable, but also incredibly strong. He had torn up money, yes, but he had bought back his soul. The rich man, poor woman barrier had dissolved. They were just two people standing on a sidewalk, one helping the other. He knew what he had to do next. The tearing of the paper was just the prologue. Vincent reached into his inner pocket and pulled out the thick envelope containing the deed to the house, the master document he had signed that morning. He also took the spare set of keys he had been given. He walked up to Susan, closing the distance between his world and hers. He took her hand, her rough, hard-working hand, and pressed the keys and the envelope into her palm. Susan, he said, looking her in the eye, the house is yours. She looked at the items in her hand, confused. I can't rent it from you, Mr. Reed. I have no money. Vincent shook his head, a genuine smile breaking across his face. No rent, no mortgage. I'm not being your landlord. He took a deep breath. I bought the debt, and am forgiving it. It's paid in full. Susan's knees almost buckled. She grabbed the car door for support. What? You can't be serious. That's hundreds of thousands of dollars. She looked at him like he was an angel or a madman. Why? Vincent shrugged, looking at the house. Because you taught me something today. You taught me that I was poor, and you were rich. This house belongs to your family, Vincent continued. It belongs to the memory of your husband. It belongs to these kids. He gestured to the children. Don't pay me back. Just keep being who you are. Raise them to be like you. It was the ultimate act of giving back. He was transferring his millionaire wealth to where it was needed most. The shocking twist was complete. The predator had become the savior. Susan looked at the deed, seeing her name or the absence of the bank's naming in her mind. The weight of the world, the fear of homelessness, The grief of losing her sanctuary was all lifted in a second. It was a miracle. I don't know what to say. She wept, the tears flowing freely now. Tears of pure joy. Thank you isn't enough. Vincent felt a lump in his throat. You already paid me. Susan, with the water, with the phone, with the lesson. He closed her fingers over the keys. Go back inside. Unpack. You're home. It was a moment of humanity that transcended business. He had lost an asset, but he had gained memory that would keep him warm forever. The eviction was reversed. The foreclosure was history. He had used his power to change the ending of their life story, and in doing so, he had changed his own. Susan collapsed onto the sidewalk, not in defeat, but in overwhelming relief. She pulled her children into a fierce embrace, sobbing loudly, releasing months of pent-up terror. We're staying. She cried to them. We're staying home. The children, sensing the shift, started jumping and cheering, their laughter mixing with her tears. It was a symphony of gratitude, the most beautiful sound Vincent had ever heard. He watched them for a moment, etching the image into his mind. The struggling family was safe. The house was theirs. He felt a profound sense of peace settle over him, a feeling that no paycheck had ever provided. He turned and walked back to his car, his steps light. He didn't need a thank you parade. The sight of them walking back up the path, back into their sanctuary, was enough. He got into his luxury sedan, the leather seat feeling different now, not like a throne, but just a chair. He started the engine, looking at the house one last time. Susan was on the porch, waving, her face radiant with unbelievable joy. She blew him a kiss, a gesture of pure love. Vincent raised his hand in a wave, a lump in his throat. As he drove away, leaving the poverty-stricken neighborhood behind, he didn't check his bank account. He didn't call Marcus. He just drove, the city skyline looming ahead. But the city looked different. The buildings weren't just assets anymore. They were full of people, full of stories. He realized that for all his millions, he had been spiritually bankrupt until today. He had bought a house to flip it for a profit, but he had flipped his own life instead. He understood now that generosity wasn't a loss. It was the only investment that guaranteed a return. He was a rich man before, but now he was wealthy, truly wealthy. The life-changing journey was over, but his new life was just beginning. He smiled, turning up the radio, finally at peace with the man in the mirror. He had given away a house, but he had found a home in his own heart. It was the best deal he had ever made. Redemption tasted sweet, and the road ahead looked brighter than ever. Vincent drove a car worth more than a house, but he was running on spiritual fumes until he met Susan. This story is a powerful testament that while your net worth is calculated in dollars, your self-worth is calculated in the acts of kindness you leave behind. The most expensive things in life aren't things at all. They are the bridges we build to other people. If you are someone who refuses to let the world turn you cold, if you believe that empathy is the ultimate currency in a bankrupt world, then you belong here. Click that subscribe button, not just to watch, but to join our movement of modern-day believers. Let's prove that good people still exist. Like this video to send a signal to the algorithm that we want more hope and less hate in our feeds. Comment below with your truth. Have you ever judged someone wrongly and had your eyes opened? I read every story, and I want to hear yours. Share this video with just one person who needs a reminder today that it is never, ever too late to do the right thing. And don't let this feeling fade away. Our channel is a vault of human spirit. Dive into our library of past videos to uncover more hidden gems and emotional journeys that will restore your faith in humanity, one story at a time. As for what's coming next, we are currently chasing a story that is even more shocking and heartwarming than this one. Trust me, you do not want to be the last to know. Turn on that notification bell right now, so you have a front row seat when we reveal our next masterpiece. See you in the next video.